Hi students, Professor Matt here. Today's lecture is on gay, lesbian, queer literary analysis. So a brief overview for gay, lesbian, queer theory focuses specifically on sexuality as a primary component of human identity, social organization, and textual representation. So as opposed to some of the other theories we've discussed so far, this is a social identity theory more in the line of feminist theory. Now, same-sex desire dates back to ancient Greece, but gained prominence with the gay rights movement of the late 1960s. At that time, gay became a term of political commitment and also a rejection of the term as a medical labeling, such as homosexual. So homosexual was denied as a term at that point, and gay was the accepted term. Lesbian refers to women, while gay refers to men, and the term queer is a term that's been reclaimed by the gay lesbian community to help erase the distinction between gay and lesbian, and also include transgendered individuals as well. Now, from an essentialist point of view, they would look at the transhistorical essence of all queer individuals. So looking at what would unite everyone throughout history, whereas a more constructivist approach would look at the historical circumstances as well as the prevailing social definitions and norms at specific moments in time. So it would look at how that would evolve historically. Now, of course, from a structuralist point of view, we could look at heterosexual, homosexual as a binary, but of course a deconstructionist approach would focus on how transgender is more fluid, so it's not sort of an either-or, but there's more of a spectrum involved. Now, Judith Butler is a key figure in queer theory, and her claim was that no one can really lay a specific claim to sexuality, but one can perform an identity. So you can repeat clothing, gestures, attitude, etc., and those sort of things that embody an identity can also be imitated as well as parodied, which would be done in drag. Now, a quote from one of Butler's essays. She says, "Since I was 16, being a lesbian is what I've been." And of course, the ontological implications of Butler's statement is that identity isn't simply being, right? It's not just simple existence, but an element of performance invades here. So the term have been being, right, indicates that one has to constantly or repeatedly perform an identity in order to maintain that. And when one stops performing the identity, that identity ceases to be. Now, according to Foucault, Foucault is another key figure in queer theory. His sociological research, he was able to identify 4 specific types of humans that society has tried to control throughout history, and sort of labeled these behaviors as being aberrant or deviant. One being the hysterical woman, which we might commonly refer to as the nymphomaniac, has been a person that society has tried to control. Now, of course, it's true throughout patriarchal societies that men have been more free to express their sexuality and women have been more repressed. The second would be the masturbating child. The third, the Malthusian couple, who was named after Thomas Malthus, who was a political economist, sort of a doomsday preacher, who was looking at society and saying that we don't have enough resources in the world, that eventually the population is going to overtake the world and we're going to be in a lot of trouble. There won't be enough resources for everyone. And we see him as somewhat of a prophet of sorts, coming before the time of birth control or sort of the ethics of population control. And then the fourth would be the perverse adult, what Foucault called the perverse adult, or the homosexual. Now, of course, heterosexual, homosexual can be understood as a binary, but to some degree there's not one without the other. And of course, this is the great move from structuralism to deconstruction, to say that you don't really have a privileged hierarchy here, but what you have is 2 terms that are mutually dependent upon each other. So if there is no homosexual, there is no heterosexual, right? You can't understand one without the other. And of course, performance is key because without the performance, the subject would lose their identity. Now, drag is what calls that identity into question, sort of points it out, what you're assuming to be natural, this sort of ideology of the favored heterosexual binary in the term, is actually something that's purely socially constructed. And so drag is what calls that out into question and parodies that. Now, in terms of gay marriage, obviously a very important concept for queer theorists, there's sort of two camps within that. One would be the camp of equality, so trying to fight for equal rights in gay marriage. The other one would look at shunning marriage itself as a bourgeois institution, sort of turning up its nose and saying, you know, the bourgeois can have marriage, we'll be happily content with something else. All right, some of the key principles of queer theory. One, sexuality is thoroughly connected to our social existence. So, you know, this is an important topic because our attitudes about sex, emotion, erotic activity reveal much about our social classification as well as our society's economic and political priorities. So we enact laws that kind of tell us who can legally cohabit. Religions give sanction to certain types of marriages. And of course, there's tax incentives for cohabitation. And so we privilege one over the other when we grant those rights to some people but not to others. The second key principle is that negative social attitudes about the expressions of sexual desire have had profound impact on many individuals, both public and private lives. So being labeled deviant is certainly one way. Of course, people have been killed, unfortunately, for being gay. There's bullying, there's other violence that takes place simply over one's sexual orientation. And of course there's other ways in which they're discriminated against, available options. Can they legally marry? Is it a social stigma, hospital visitations, tax incentives, health care insurance, and so on and so forth. The third key principle is that social attitudes about sexuality have changed over time. So in ancient Greek culture, Plato theorized that all of us seek a perfect complement, and in Greek culture that could be of the same sex or that could be of the opposite sex. Now, ancient Greek culture tended to romanticize or idealize the man-boy relationship, which of course we find criminal and very taboo in our culture today. Throughout history, religion has given shape to sexual sanctions, telling us who is proper and improper to marry. And in some cultures, we have mandated reproduction. And this includes not only sexual relationships, but also fraternal relationships, so friendships, and includes how males and males or females and females might bond. So, for example, in some cultures, it's perfectly acceptable for men to hold hands or put their arms around each other, maybe kiss each other on the cheek, and in other cultures that would not be socially acceptable. Fourth key principle, men's same-sex desires have been treated differently than women's, so you can kind of combine a queer theory with a gender theory and look at how women have been treated differently, lesbians versus gays. The fifth key principle is that social attitudes about sexuality have differed across cultures, religion, classes, and ethnic groups. So you could also combine queer theory with, say, a Marxist theory or a race ethnicity theory as well. Six, key in queer theory is the idea of performance versus nature. So how much of our sexual identity is based on our nature, our DNA, our makeup, our genes, who we are, sort of biologically speaking, and then how much is a performance, how much is an identity that we take on. The same goes with the nature and nurture debate. So how much of what we are is based on our genetic makeup, and how much is the environment that we grow up in, and then how much is shaped by who we actually decide to be. And so these are complex debates about which there's much contention. And seventh key principle is that social attitudes about sexuality resonate throughout literary text, and so text can certainly represent gay, lesbian, queer individuals show their struggles. They can be used to maintain the status quo, to kind of keep in place the ideologies that exist, or they could be used to challenge the status quo and make us think about the worldview from another person's perspective. So that covers our introduction to queer theory. This is Professor Matt signing off.